Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2, and today I'll be showing you guys an insanely strong Stabbomancer build that takes heavy advantage of flying around the map at Mach 10 while doing a ridiculous amount of damage in the process. With this build, you not only have a super easy time leveling up and going through the early endgame progression, getting all the way to Chaos level 20 with no problems at all, but you also absolutely breeze through level 20 Chaos Chambers like they're nothing, completely just melting every single boss, and quite literally flying around the map, which is a ton of fun. Spamming your abilities, using your guns to do maximum damage, and flying around the map all at the same time sounds like a lot of fun to you. This is the build for you. There will be some extra gameplay of me doing a max level Chaos Chamber at the end of the video, so make sure to stick around for that. There's also a ton of different ways to set this up, and I'll do my best to cover all of them for you guys. If you guys are interested in helping each other out in Wonderlands, feel free to join my Discord, where there's a ton of people trading items, sharing builds, game files, and much more. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to drop a like, helps me out a ton, and subscribe for videos similar to this one, and let's get into it. If you're looking for Tiny Tina's Wonderlands gold, services, or items fast and safe, make sure to check out u4gm.com and use my coupon code NICK for 5% off, link in the description. So like I mentioned before, there is actually multiple different ways to set this build up, especially while leveling and also at endgame. If you are playing Stabbomancer and you don't want to also play Spore Warden, which is what we're going to be taking advantage of, an alternative is Spellshot. Spellshot is particularly good while leveling and also at max level. You mainly take advantage of Spellshot with its capstone traits and with spamming spells like Buffmeister, etc. If you guys are interested in a build that takes advantage of that, I already have a video dedicated to that, and that would be fairly similar to this one. However, this one is going to take more inspiration from Spore Warden and end up doing a decent bit more damage while also getting an insane amount of movement speed, which is a lot of fun to set up. Both of them are pretty good for leveling. I'm going to go over all the different variations, or at least try to, without talking for 50 minutes long. So let's just get into it. In terms of the hero stats, I always seem to forget about this. Of course, always going to be maxing out that crit damage. Go for Village Idiot. Crit damage by default is stronger than anything else could ever dream to be. Extra crit damage by default is just extra crit damage. Here's just extra damage overall. The crit chance here, I can't really tell if it works. Like I mentioned in my previous video, it seems to just be multiplicative off of your base crit, so then it ends up giving you not all that much crit. Blah 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 blah. We're just going to be ignoring that. While leveling, you can go skill cooldown, because I actually recommend that you use a different skill while you are leveling than when you are at endgame. A lot of the stuff at endgame, which we'll talk about in a bit, obviously is heavily gear reliant and very situational. So if you're leveling, skill cooldown is a fantastic option. Alternatively, spell cooldown is good and status damage is good. For this build, we're going to be going into status damage. I want to get 40% just because I like the even number, and then I'm going to put the rest of my points into spell cooldown. I just want to max that out because we are using a Buffmeister to give us some extra damage by default, and lowering the cooldown on this means that we can just have more uptime on it, and it also increases our movement speed, and it's just fun to use. The rest of it we can just pop into status damage here. But again, you could opt instead of status damage for skill cooldown. The status damage is not significant. It's just better than nothing is kind of the way that I view it. Like I mentioned, we are Stabbomancer primarily, obviously, and then we are also Spore Warden. Of course, while you're leveling, you could, instead of Spore Warden, decide to play Spellshot, because Spellshot by default, getting those spell weaving stacks is just free extra damage pretty much, because you can go right into the early tree of Spellshot and get some extra gun damage. I don't think it's all that significant, and you end up playing Spore Warden mainly. There's two different ways to set this up. One way is where you are primarily Spore Warden and you take advantage of Wrath of Nature and play the angles. The other option is you are maxed out into Stabbomancer and you take advantage of 1,000 cuts and Executioner's Blade. Currently, Spore Warden's setup overall is going to be better because play the angles double dips with a lot of different damage, and it ends up just absolutely destroying enemies, and also you have a lot of enchants and other things that just make it do a whole bunch of extra damage. But I've played with the Stabbomancer maxed out, and this actually isn't bad at all. Like, it actually is pretty good, especially if you use From the Shadows, which is what I would recommend using while leveling. This ability is just going to give you guaranteed crit whenever you enter your stealth. In terms of how we want to actually spend our points, later on, I want to cover this first. Later on, at max level, we are using Barrage. The reason for Barrage is not only is this going to let us proc Wrath of Nature more often, but it's also going to proc our enchants. So whenever we use our Barrage, we're going to get this enchant, which is a massive amount of our damage, and then we're also going to get while action skill active elemental damage, while action skill active frost damage, and on action skill start, because the on action skill ones are currently bugged. But the on action skill start every 10 seconds is one of the main reasons that we're using Barrage. From the Shadows isn't all that bad because it's going to give you guaranteed crit. However, because this enchant exists for Spore Warden, the amount of damage that you gain from this is way more than critting ends up being, so that's why we're going with that. But an alternative version to this setup is using From the Shadows instead of Barrage. While leveling, I actually would go From the Shadows, and then you could spend your early points into reducing the action skill cooldown rate. For now, we're going to max out our gun damage because let's just go all the way down in the Spore Warden tree, and then we'll talk about the Stabbomancer tree. In terms of how you want to optimize it while leveling up, it's a little bit difficult to tell, but we'll talk about that at the end of this because I don't want to keep going back and forth between leveling. So we're going to max out Eagle Eye there for that additional gun damage, and then here we have some extra points. I'm going to put 1 point into the Mushroom Companion Taunting because it just does a little bit of extra damage, and then I'm going to put some points into Affinity here, which is going to increase our ability damage, so it's going to increase the damage of Barrage, which is then going to increase the damage of Play the Angles, which ends up doing a ton of our damage. And then one of the main parts of this build is Windrunner. Whenever we get a kill, it's going to increase our movement speed and fire rate by 24%, so this is extremely strong overall. And then we're going to put the rest of our points into Quiver of Holding here. This is just going to increase our magazine size, give us some ammo regen. It's not all that significant. Our main goal right here is just get to Wrath of Nature and get Play the Angles because this is the bulk of our damage. So we're just going to put the rest of our points into Affinity here, and then we can either decide to put our points into Bullseye for the gun crit or Bounty of the Hunt to get more action skill cooldown rate. The gun crit isn't all that great for the same reason that Dexterity isn't all that good, is because this is multiplicative off of your base crit. Your base crit is a very low number, so adding 50% of 0, for example, is still going to be 0, right? It's not, our base crit isn't 0, it's 5%, so we get 7.5%, but regardless, this is fairly insignificant, so you could literally do whatever you want with the rest of these points. If you feel like your companion's doing a lot of damage early on, you can put the points there. A lot of people with this setup, while using From the Shadows, they like to use Called Shot, and you aim down sight. You could certainly kill bosses like a little bit faster. However, we're taking advantage of a lot of the movement speed here, so moving faster is going to increase our damage, and Called Shot ADSing is going to actually reduce your damage because you're moving slower, and I think that's a really clunky playstyle, but I don't like to do that. With the rest of my points, I'm just going to go a little bit into the gun crit because we don't really have a better option. And then we're going to max out Wrath of Nature. Whenever we deal ability damage, they're going to take increased damage. With a class mod, this is going to increase it to 108% damage. So anytime we proc Barrage or Play the Angles is going to ricochet. This is going to do ability damage and proc Wrath of Nature. Then we're going to get Headhunter to just increase our gun damage to critical hit areas. Then we have some extra points. Again, Bounty of the Hunt or Bullseye. I'm just going to do Bullseye because whatever. Then we get Play the Angles. Play the Angles is extremely good because for whatever reason, it will randomly just proc on a single enemy and then it double dips into a lot of other damage modifiers. It seems to benefit from Wrath of Nature more than it should. So for an example, I'll hit an enemy and I'll do like 100k directly to them. Let's say like 80, 100k directly to them. And then Play the Angles will ricochet, hit back, and it'll do like 400k out of nowhere. So you can get some really good RNG with this, and it just absolutely destroys things. And this is one of the main reasons that Spore Warden is just so good for literally any sort of gun build, because Play the Angles paired with Wrath of Nature, and the weapon that we're using just does an insane amount of damage. Like I mentioned before, though, if you don't want to abuse this bug or the fact that it has an interaction where it double dips a lot, you can easily go 1000 cuts Stabbomancer. I'll explain that alternative version of the setup, but let's talk about what we want to spec into in Stabbomancer. So we're going to go with Haste, flat extra movement speed, which is really good because we're taking advantage of Swift Death, which is going to increase the damage that we do the faster that we're moving. And we're also just going to get some extra free gun damage and spell damage here, which is certainly pretty good for leveling up. And then we're just going to put the rest of those points into Swift Death, just max out how much extra damage we're going to be getting while we are moving quickly. Then we have some extra points. None of these are all that great. I like to go Exploit their weakness because I'm actually applying 3 status effects, so this is going to increase my damage against like boss enemies by about 18%. While leveling, I would not recommend putting your points here. I would just put your points immediately into Arsenal. And again, I'll talk about what I think is the ideal leveling setup in a minute here. And then we're going to put the rest of our points into Arsenal just so we can get all the way down here to get Elusive. I've tried Contagion. In single target, it literally does not work to where it's going to apply a random status effect. In theory, I thought that if you're shooting like, 100 shots a second, you'd immediately apply all status effects, and then you'd get 4 times 6 or 24% extra damage on enemies by having all the status effects active. This literally doesn't work against a single target. I don't really know why, so I'm not going to be putting my points there anymore. I'm just going to be maxing out Arsenal, and then you can put your point literally wherever you want. If you like Shadow Step, just do whole bunch of melee damage on one swing, you could do that. You could put the point into Called Shot. You could put the point into Bounty of the Hunt. I'm just going to go with the extra critical hit damage because it's free. The leveling setup, what I would recommend doing is I would immediately... I don't know, it's kind of hard to tell. I probably wouldn't go all the way down into Wrath of Nature and Headhunter. I'd probably go a half and half setup because a lot of the good stuff is really early on here. Getting Swift Death early on is just a lot of extra damage, as well as Arsenal. but also you want the action skill cooldown rate to reduce the cooldown from the shadows. This is kind of up to preference. If I was playing, I'd probably go for the action skill cooldown rate immediately, just so that I have more uptime on From the Shadows, and then I'd go into the gun damage, and then I'd go Swift Death, and then probably Haste, and I'd probably stop with this tree once I had all those maxed out, and then I'd go into Eagle Eye for gun damage, and then I would go into probably Windrunner immediately after that. And then you could decide to go wherever you want. I would probably just then fill out the tree with the extra magazine size, the extra ability damage, and whatever else. But at that point, you'd be doing so much damage that you probably don't care what you put the rest of your points into. That's a really good early game setup. So to recap that, I'd probably max out Arsenal and then max out Swift Death. Then I would max out Haste, max out Bounty of the Hunt or Eagle Eye, and then max out Windrunner. That's probably what I would do. If you want to do a Stabbomancer main setup, you could, instead of going all the way down to Wrath of Nature, Headhunter, Play the Angles, you could stop right here at Windrunner, and you could alternatively spec more into Sneak Attack and then get 1,000 cuts, so crits increase your damage out for duration. And then you could put like a point or two into Alchemical Agent and then get Executioner's Blade. Executioner's Blade I've tested out. It doesn't do all that much damage. I was hoping that every single gun crit would proc the blade, but it doesn't really seem to do that. It does increase your damage by like a pretty slight amount because it just does passive damage. The main reason that's good to get down into the Stabbo tree is for 1,000 cuts. And you can proc this and you're instantly on bosses because you're going to be getting a whole bunch of crits anyway. And especially if you wanted to use From the Shadows, which I don't recommend because Barrage is just so much better at max level. But if you wanted to use From the Shadows and then 1,000 cuts, that could be a pretty good option as well. But again, the way that I have it set up I think is overall ideal, but obviously it isn't Stabbomancer main, so if you wanted it to be all the way down in Stabbomancer, you could very easily do that, but it isn't all that big of a deal. In terms of the weapons here, we're using liquid cooling. This thing just has a ridiculous amount of damage. It's cryo, it just does damage. There's not really all that much to say about it other than it just does more damage than anything else. Any sort of cryo SMG, like Hyperius, Tedior, or Dala, that has this little shooting formation that shoots along the ground there, and then has this little like tracking thing. These things are extremely good, and I'd highly recommend looking out for them while leveling up. Any sort of pistol, it doesn't actually have to be cryo for this build. Any sort of pistol that is a crossbow that has like the crossbolt deal increased damage is really good. The Queen's Cry that I have here is particularly good. You get even ×2 on this, which is very, very strong. You can get Ruby Spite. I have a dedicated video talking about what I think the best weapons are in the game, so I'd recommend watching that if you're still new to the game and curious. But Endgame, we're going to be using liquid cooling because that's the best. For our pickaxe, you definitely want the Goblin Pickaxe of the Crusher. This is going, or not of the Crusher, but any Goblin Pickaxe. You can get this fairly easily from farming Pigwort, which you can unlock early on into the game. The special trait for this pickaxe is whenever you spawn gold or pick up gold, it's going to increase your movement speed, spell cooldown, and action skill cooldown rate. This is literally perfect for this build because you're constantly getting gold just by killing enemies. Increasing your movement speed is going to invariably increase your damage. Increasing your action skill cooldown rate is going to increase your damage because you're getting more skill cooldown uses with your Barrage, or if you're using From the Shadows, you have more uptime on From the Shadows. And then it's going to increase your spell cooldown, which is perfect because we're using Buffmeister as our spell of choice. The reason for Buffmeister is not only do I have one that is fire, which is going to apply a fire status effect. So as you can see here, if I attack this guy, I'll also shoot off a barrage so you can see the poison. So you can see the poison's proccing, but I'm also getting both cryo, poison, and fire, which means that I am taking advantage of 3 status effects, so I'm getting 18% increased damage. I'm also using this fire one mainly just because it's the only one that I have that has 2 spell charges on it, and I was able to get a pretty good roll. Alternatively, you could go dark magic for the healing. That's probably what would be best in slot here, but this is the only one that I've ever gotten that has 2 spell charges, which is really good because then I have more uptime, and this just increases your base damage dealt. The way the Buffmeister works is that it actually just applies to your base damage. So let's say I have 824, this is just going to add 141 to that, so I just do extra damage by default, and then it's calculated afterward. Or sorry, it's calculated into my base damage, so then it scales off of everything. So this is just going to increase your base damage by a lot. But while leveling, you could use any spell that you want. This build is not restrictive at all. You don't have to do any sort of specific type of damage with this build. You can use anything. It's basically just ability, just flat damage is what this build is capable of. So that's probably one of the best things about it, is that you can just use whatever you want in terms of your spells or in terms of your weapons if there's a certain weapon of choice that you have. In terms of your necklace, you have a lot of options here. I have poison damage and Spore Warden power. The reason for Spore Warden power is that it's actually going to increase your play the angles damage here, and it's also going to just increase your mushroom damage and stuff. Increasing play the angles is particularly good because it's just going to proc off of barrage and just do a whole bunch of extra damage. Stabbomancer power isn't bad, but it's just a little bit of extra crit, which I don't really think that's all that great, but if you're using From the Shadows, increasing the duration there could be pretty good. The poison damage I like because it increases the damage that my little poison enchant is going to do, and the damage that deals is really good, and it seems to scale on its own stuff, so it does a whole bunch of extra damage, sometimes even more damage than my ability itself, or sorry, my normal gunshots. So those are really good. And then I have a little thing down here where my crits increase my companion crit, and then if my companion crits, which we do have a companion, which is the mushroom, I get a little bit of extra damage. It's fairly insignificant, but you can relatively frequently get this critical hit damage, which isn't 0, right? Alternatively, you can get any sort of damage of the gun type that you're using. This frost damage Stabbomancer one is pretty good. Getting anything sort of like gun magazine size, status effect damage, all damage dealt, even action skill cooldown rate is particularly good. While leveling, if you get this when the Fate Maker or a companion kills an enemy, you get increased damage. This is pretty good because it's just going to make your companion do a little bit more damage, which while leveling isn't all that bad. But anything like this, frost damage, Spore Warden power, reload speed, all damage dealt, gun reload speed, all damage dealt, fire rate, loot luck. There's a whole bunch of different options here. I've tested literally every single necklace in here because I was trying to determine what I thought was best, and this is ultimately the conclusion that I came to just because play the angles does so much damage. But you could very easily go frost damage, Stabbomancer power, and barely notice, too significant of a difference. In terms of our ward, we want to be going with Cursed Wit. I go with this on literally every single build. Anytime that we get our ward depleted, we're going to deal increased damage, and this scales off of everything else. And as you can see, I have an enchant. We'll talk about enchants at the end, but that's just the best ward in the game. Not really all that much to say about it. It just increases your damage. For our rings, I have 2 of the same. Gun damage increased by 17%, and I have pistol crit damage and action skill cooldown rate, which would also be very good if I was using From the Shadows for just reducing the cooldown there. And then while the ward is not full, effects are increased by 100%. My shield is ideally never full because I'm always using Cursed Wit, so this is going to increase this up to 34%, and it's also going to increase the pistol crit damage and the action skill cooldown rate by a ton. So just by these, if I was playing From the Shadows, I'd have 80% action skill cooldown rate, so very, very good there. For our class item, there's a lot of different options here. I think anyone that has total crit chance is reduced, but crit damage is increased is what you want to go for, especially if you're playing the From the Shadows setup. It's just extra damage by default. Mine has movement speed and gun damage and fire rate, so this is a really good roll here. We don't really care about the action skill cooldown rate trait down there, but what we really care about is having the Wrath of Nature, so we get 100% increased damage whenever we use our barrage against an enemy, or whenever Play the Angles is going to proc. There's a lot of other options here too. There's some purple ones, or there's some ones where you can get 1,000 cuts, which is just going to increase your damage whenever you get crits, right? And also give you some Spore Warden and Stabbomancer power. This by default, like, I've tested a lot of these as well. I like having just the Wrath of Nature, but any of these ones that I'm going to hover over real quick are going to be pretty good. Getting Eagle Eye isn't all that bad. Getting the increased damage from the movement speed and Windrunner is a pretty good one as well. Getting extra Eagle Eye and 1,000 cuts is good. And then anything that you want to roll on this would be like movement speed, fire rate, gun damage. If you can get all damage dealt, I don't know if you can get that. Yeah, all damage dealt here. My roll would actually be perfect if gun damage was replaced by all damage dealt, or even fire rate. But all these ones that I just showed you guys, all these 5 are particularly good options. I forgot to talk about the enchants. So obviously, like I mentioned before, we're using the barrage one, where after 10 seconds after activating barrage, you just deal extra damage. The poison does a whole bunch of damage, really good damage. While action skill is active, increase elemental damage. Currently there's a bug where whenever you activate an action skill, this is going to last for 60 seconds. This 35% seems to scale off of everything else on its own multiplier, because it doesn't count as, frost, poison, dark magic, or whatever. It seems to just be elemental damage, which is pretty much any form of damage in the game. So 35% flat damage there. Then we get an extra 50% from our spell here. While action skill is active, frost damage is increased. Alternatively, you could swap out on action skill start, increase gun damage by 40%. You could swap this out to poison damage, because we're using the Spore Warden thing here. Some other options are on action skill start, increase damage dealt by 20%, which may even be a little bit better than the gun damage, because the poison damage itself, I don't know if it scales off of poison damage or not, and I also don't know if Play the Angles is going to scale off of gun damage definitively. So the extra 20% here could be better spent, or the 40% could be better spent with the 20% other liquid cooling that I have. Obviously, if you're not playing Stabbomancer, or if you're not playing the Spore Warden capstone, then and you want to use From the Shadows, you could very easily just swap out the Spore Warden one for this one that I mentioned here. And there's some other ones where, like, on spell cast increase frost damage or on spell cast increase overall damage dealt. Those are not going to be as good, but they're still pretty good options. That's pretty much going to do it for the build. Now I'm going to show you guys a little bit of gameplay. Just like my previous video, we're just going to do a Chaos 20, and I'm just going to show you guys. I'm not going to edit the beginning of it just because I want to show you guys what it functions like in, real time without me editing or anything like that. And then once you guys get a little bit of an idea, then I'll start editing because the Chaos Chamber gameplay can be a little bit boring. If you guys would like to see a setup of this where I'm using, like, From the Shadows and I'm not using Barrage and I'm not taking advantage of the Barrage enchant or anything, and you just want to see, while I was talking about it and thinking about it, I was like, a build being in From the Shadows all the time could be pretty fun. I don't know that it would, like, I know for sure that it isn't as good because I've seen gameplay of that, and the amount of damage that you get from this setup with the Spore Warden stuff is just way too good. As you can see, I didn't have my one action skill there, so damage was kind of bad. But the damage that you get from this is just a lot better. But I think that could be a particularly interesting setup, especially if they were ever to patch the interactions that Play the Angles has. So that could be interesting. I just now realized that I forgot to show my enchants, so I'm going to have to do that after this and edit that in. Very fun. But as you can see, the damage is really good, and then once you pick up some gold, you get some kills, you run around, you just fly around the map, man. You just fly like a madman. I whiffed that barrage. My sensitivity keeps changing in this game. This game is, like, very much not meant for playing on PC, which can be kind of rough. But as you can see, that barrage right there did 112,000. Not barrage, the Play the Angles ricochet did 112,000, and we're just flying through here. What I like about this setup is I like the movement speed, and I like that there isn't very much setup. You don't really have to think about it while you're playing. You kind of just shoot your barrage out. If you don't hit the main target, it's not all that big of a deal. It does increase your damage by a good bit, but you're mainly using the Wrath of Nature for on-demand boss damage, which, you're not really going to miss your barrage on a boss, but also just to stack Play the Angles like crazy. But like I mentioned, I actually went in here with the full Stabbomancer setup, and it wasn't all that significant in terms of, like, its mob clearing. It mainly just had more damage when it comes to bosses. The only thing that I really don't like about my am I using the item? Yeah, I am using the gun magazine size one. The only thing I don't like about this gun is I don't like how much mag it takes up. What did I mean to say? I meant to say I don't like that, like, if the fire rate is really high and I'm not landing those crits, that I have to actually reload. The reload can be really painful sometimes. So makes me want to play my spell shot more, or it makes me actually want to do that From the Shadows setup and just run around in From the Shadows at all times. I think that could be particularly good, but I mean, not much to say here. You kind of just kill stuff. I'm kind of dying to the water and these lightning things, which is a lot of fun here, and he is immune. I don't think I've ever fought this guy. Okay, this is a very annoying floor. I'm not gonna lie with you guys. This is a very annoying floor. Once I can actually play the game, things kind of die pretty quick. But that was not a good display. I will be honest. But I don't blame the game for that one. I don't blame the build. I blame the curses, 100%. I'm probably just gonna edit for whenever there's actually good gameplay now, because it's getting a little tiresome. You just walk up to stuff and they kind of just die. I'm sure a lot of people are wondering which build is better, this one or the Berserker one. The Berserker one is unquestionably better when it's maxed out at Endgame. And I think it is a bit more consistent, but this one's nice for flying around, and I think there's a lot of Stabbomancer players out there that don't really know what type of setup they want to do. So that's kind of the main reason that I wanted to do this video. Somebody even commented asking me, and I was like, it's probably easy to set up. It's probably pretty much the same as the Berserker one that I just made. You just play Stabbomancer instead, because I figured, there's some pretty good damage dealt increases within the Stabbo tree, so it's probably just the same thing, and it pretty much is. But it is cool that you have the option to actually play the Stabbo tree. I think the capstone for Stabbo needs to be buffed, because it seems to have a internal cooldown for the proc, and I think that kind of just makes it bad. Look at that reload, dude. That reload is so painful. That reload is really painful. Maybe I need a different roll, or Maybe there's something I can do to make that a little less bad, but overall, not much to say. You kind of just, you know, you just kill stuff. You run around and you shoot your gun and you kill stuff. Here's a Dragon Lord statue. I like bullying those things in the video because usually they take a bit to die, so insta-ing them like that can be kind of fun. Now we're at the boss fight. Let's see who we get. We get Cressilla. I've never fought her with this build. Carcilla, I don't know what it is. I don't know what her name is. Hopefully this does well though. Celissa, I was not even close, dude. People are gonna tear me up in the comments, man. People were tearing me up for my I feel like I missed a lot there. I didn't know how to kill Volcanar. People were not happy, dude. People were not happy. They're like, have you never done this boss before? And I'm like, man, I just don't pay attention. I just shoot and walk away, dude. I don't know. She died pretty quick. Not as quick as I would have liked her to, but I think that was kind of my fault. I think a lot of shots missed and other things. But with this build, you're kind of at the mercy of the RNG with play the angle sometimes. If you get a lot of procs, especially with your your weapon enchant proc, kind of at the mercy of getting a lot of procs there. But if you get lucky, you can just two-shot enemies. That's pretty much it. Thank you guys for watching. What should I roll on? Hey, this is a pretty good little thing that dropped here. I'm gonna roll on spells because I want another Buffmeister with 2 charges, and also I want some Sunder skills for a dark magic build that I'm gonna be doing with Spellshot and Graveborn. If you guys are interested in that, let me know. It's difficult to get it set up for sure, but if I can get some items, maybe I should have spent this on pistol. I'm looking for some more pixie items, but any sort of Sunder spell will be pretty nice here. I don't think that I'll get any, but I'll just show you guys all the loot that I'm getting. Okay, we got 1 Sunder, but I need one that is 2 charges. I'll take it because it's volatile, has some pretty high base damage, but getting Sunders with 2 charges and actually good rolls is like nearly impossible. I challenge you guys to get anything else. I have a higher drop rate of liquid cooling volatiles than I do getting Sunders with 2 charges or Sunders to drop in general. I've gotten a few this time, which is more than I usually do. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Didn't really get many good ones. Alright, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys later.